Hi, everybody. This is Jose Palomino with another exciting episode of Business Growth on Purpose. And since I started Value Prop close to 20 years ago and working with dozens and dozens of small business owners, one of the things that keeps on coming up, and it always comes up, is, why answering the question, why should anyone buy X from you at Y price? What are those things that really answer the questions your buyer is interested in? So today's guest, Zach Basner, who works with Impact Plus, that's Marcus Sheridan company, is going to join us. We're going to dig into this, and we're going to really look at the 5 big questions you and your company, through your website, through your digital, everything you do, have to be answering so that prospective customers can learn about you in a way that creates trust towards you and predisposes them to want to at least learn about what you have to do or what you have to offer them. So this is an important episode. Listen closely as Zach Basner joins us right now. Well, welcome, Zach, to Business Growth on Purpose.
Thank you for having me, Jose. Excited to be here.
Oh, yeah, no, we are very much so. Now, Zach, just for our audience, if you could give us a little context about what you do and who you do it for.
Yeah. So my name is Zach Basner. I'm a digital sales and marketing coach for a digital sales and marketing coaching and training company called Impact. We're based out of Connecticut, but we're a fully remote company spread out all over the world now at this point. And we help companies take their digital sales and marketing in-house. In other words, not ever being dependent on a marketing agency for their, normal marketing tasks they need to do.
Well, I think that's particularly interesting because obviously there's so much literature, especially aimed at the small and mid-market, about outsource everything, whether it's E-Myth, EOS, whatever. And, not bad advice, but it's basically outsource those things that are not your core competence. And that's been around since In Search of Excellence, 40 years ago, right? So here you are, a little bit counter narrative to that, saying like, well, wait a second, you probably want to bring these functions in-house. And I jibe with that for a reason I'll get into in a moment, but let me just ask you, how somebody says, well, gee, I don't have anybody who really knows how to do this. We're not marketers, we're engineers, or we're manufacturing folks or whatever. I'm just curious how you help them bridge that gap.
Well, it comes down to getting the right team in place for sure, like you mentioned. So if you don't have the resources in-house right now and you wanted to do this, you're going to need them. And the fact is, you have to figure out, is insourcing a good option for you? Because for some things and for some companies, it's actually not a great option. But many of the companies we work with, they want to be in control of their destiny, right? Not dependent on an outsourced company for their success. And especially when you get into many of the things we're going to give them direction on, the types of things they need to talk about on their website, the types of content that they need to produce, the videos and the things that they need to produce. Well, if you're going to do those properly and they're actually going to lead to more trust, then you shouldn't outsource it to somebody who doesn't fully understand you, doesn't fully understand your customer. No one's ever going to understand your customer as well as you do. So you're actually, in many cases, well positioned to do this in-house. What we do is we help our clients hire at least an in-house content writer and an in-house video producer. That's the start of their in-house team. We've got a great track record with that. And so, so long as they're getting the right training, they can come in, even having no industry expertise, they can come in and they can learn how to think like the customer thinks and teach in such a way that actually leads to more sales. And that's what we found is the key to success with this.
Well, you hit on something that's a little bit of a hobby horse for me, which is, what does your customer think, right? So I'm always asking clients that, and they tell me, no, you don't understand. We do this, it's like we do 7 levels of longitudinal studies, blah, 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 blah. And it just goes on and on, why it's so great and wonderful. I said, well, what do your customers think about it? So it seems like you really try to inculcate that on their teams.
Yeah. And there's actually a similar question that I ask audiences that I speak with, and also new clients, maybe in a workshop setting. I'll ask them a similar question, which is, so how has your customer changed in the way that they prefer to buy, shop, make decisions? And for some of these folks, Jose, it's like the first time they've ever been asked that question before.
Oh, yeah.
So like you're saying, they're so like inundated in the business. They don't stop
Right.
to think about how has our customer changed in the way they think, shop, make buying decisions. But if you ask the question, they have great answers. And what's interesting is you can ask a wide variety of different types of organizations the same question, and they're actually going to give very similar answers. They're very attuned to the way that their customers change, because guess what? They've changed as customers. We're less patient than we used to be. We do more research online than we used to do before. We're less trusting of salespeople. We get more quotes, right? These are the types of things that have changed. And so you ask that initial question, you get the answers, and then you go, and so how have you changed with those changes? And then it's crickets.
Oh yeah, because they haven't thought it through as a process yet.
Right.
And you know what's interesting about that question? I think it's a brilliant question. I've asked a version of that to get there, which is how have you changed as a buyer to get to that thought, just to open up their brains a little bit around that thought. But here's what I hear early in the discovery phase of I'm working with a client is they'll complain about how customers have changed without realizing it's an opportunity. If I could understand it, I could actually align better with it, which is what I'm sure your training is all about, getting them to align with reality, right? So, because the reality is, especially for a company that's been owned by the same ownership team for a period of time, Larry, who used to be the relationship I used to have at Dow or a Caterpillar or whatever the big company was, Larry retired, right? Been replaced by a Gen Zer who really doesn't want to talk to anybody, doesn't even want to pick up the phone. It's just reality, right?
Yeah.
So to the point then, and let me turn this into a question for you, Zach. So given those kinds of changes in reality, the personal has become a lot less personal, at least is what I'm hearing, what I've observed. How then does a sales and marketing team that you're equipping, you're training, you're helping them hire them, how do they have to be different than 20 years ago? You'd hire people who were good with people and who had relationships, had a Rolodex. And for certain people listening to this, well, the Rolodex, what's that? But I think you know what a Rolodex is. So, I mean, what are some of the key changes in thinking or behavior that they have to embrace to be able to map to these new realities?
Great question, because there's one fundamental change that we need to recognize as organizations. And this is the amount of the buying decision that's made before we actually know that a prospect exists. So Forrester Research Group, they do these great studies from time to time. And they found that in both B2B and B2C applications, that on average, 70 to 80% of the buying decision is made before what's known as the zero moment of truth. So that's the moment in which somebody picks up the phone and calls you, or they walk into your store, they fill out that form on your website. That's zero moment of truth has occurred. On average, 70 to 80% of the buying decision was made before then. Now, if you were to go back, let's say 20 years, if you were to guess, Jose, what do you think that number would have been back then?
20 years? Oh, I was selling 20 years ago. So I know it was probably, it was early stage because they depended on the salesperson to provide the basic education. And then you were
exactly right.
You were the bringer of the brochure.
Yeah. Yeah. So much less of the buying decision could be made before talking with the salesperson because they had the information. Right. Search engines weren't sophisticated enough. Even if they were, the information wasn't there for us to find. And so we had to be dependent on a salesperson or an organization to teach us things about the buying process. Nowadays, we can find all of this information long before we ever have to raise our hand to sales. And so if you say, okay, they're doing a lot more research. So what are they researching? What are they trying to figure out? And how can we actually leverage that activity? If they're using this tool called the internet and search engines and content to inform themselves, how can we be the ones that they're actually learning from? Because if we're not the ones that are teaching them, what ends up happening is now that we're working with this prospect, they could have misinformation. They could have some kind of like false, positives in terms of what they think they need. And we've, in some sense, lost our footing based on the things that they've learned from somebody else.
Well, we don't have an opportunity then to frame the conversation.
That's right. That's right. And
somebody else is.
And this is key. If you want to be the one that earns the trust, you want to be the one that's doing the teaching. You want to be the one that's doing the guiding, not so you can manipulate, but so they would want to work with you, even if you were more expensive, even if you didn't check all the boxes. They'd still want to work with you because they trust you, because you're the one that helped them to not make mistakes. You help them think about the things that they needed direction on. So what we found is, if you want to do this, if you say, trust is fundamental to my business, and I need to find a way to earn it early on, even before people talk with us. We found that there's 5 types of content that you need to be talking about online on your website that induce the most trust. But it's a bit of a paradox, because these 5 that we call the big 5, they are what we as customers and buyers think about, love, obsess over. But they're also 5 things that most organizations don't like to talk about, especially openly and honestly on the website.
Okay.
All right. So it's a bit of a paradox here.
So you're not going to leave us hanging now. You're going to tell us the big 5, what they are.
I'm absolutely going to share with you the big 5, because I want everybody to know that they need to go do this.
Okay.
The big 5 are as follows. The first one, cost and price.
Okay.
You and I, Jose, we want to have a very good sense as to cost and price. We don't always need a literal number, but we want to know about it. Yet most companies, they don't like talking openly and honestly about cost and price on their website. And we know this. The second of the big 5 is problems. What are problems, perceived problems with this product, this service, problems with this industry? Want to be familiar with these things, but most companies, they don't like to talk about their stuff like it has no problems. There's nothing wrong with it.
It's negative. It's
it's a negative thing. It's going to talk them out of it. When in reality, the more we talk about it, the more we talk them into it.
Okay.
Third is versus and comparisons. Everywhere, anywhere on earth, people want to compare things. We want to know how things stack up to one another. Yet again, we don't tend to do this very well, especially online. Fourth of the big 5 is best in class or best of. Guarantee you, for many of you who are listening or watching this, you've done a search in the last 30 days, which is, what is the best X for me? Not that we always buy the best, but we want to know what it is.
Right.
We don't like to talk about that sometimes as organizations, especially if we're not the best in a given category. And finally, the last of the big 5 is reviews. We love reviews. We look for them everywhere. Yet most companies, they don't actually review their own stuff. They leave it to the marketplace to do all of the reviewing, when in reality, we're well positioned as a subject matter expert within our industry or our product or our service, that we can actually do reviews so long as they're unbiased and actually feel like that customer actually feels like they're getting honest, reliable information.
Right.
Now, these big 5, these aren't going anywhere. These are the 5 things that we know, we love, we obsess over as customers. And there's still so much opportunity in almost every industry I've ever consulted in to be teaching and talking about these things much, much more.
Wow. Well, do you mind? I just want to go on one that particularly lit up my dashboard, so to speak, which is number 4, best in class, best of, right? So, so in a lot of categories, if you're a smaller, more entrepreneurial company, right, you're not a multinational or whatever, it's a little hard to take that position typically, right? Because usually that's the world of, like in my world, coaching, consulting like yours, you're thinking Boston Consulting Group or McKinsey or Accenture, I feel I'm fairly smart, but I know Accenture has like 40 people like me just in their New York office. So, in theory, right? So my point is, how do you, yet it has to be dealt with. People want to know what the best is, right?
Yeah.
So how does a smaller player play in that answer stream without disadvantaging themselves?
Yeah, really good. Now, when it comes to taking a stance in the marketplace, like who's the best, what is the best, you have to do this carefully, because you're not doing it as it's your opinion. You're doing it as, here's the criteria that we're using, and here are the player. We know the players in this game, And so we can list those for you based on your own, what you need to know. In other words, if I'm selling furniture, I can talk about what's the best furniture for a small apartment. What's the best furniture for, outdoor furniture. I can talk about those things, and I can talk about all sorts of brands, all sorts of products, but I don't have to take a stance and saying, out of the thousands of pieces of furniture that we've reviewed, we found that ours is the best. That's not really what the customer is looking for in this case. Anyhow, they're trying to figure out what's best for them. And you're just giving them access to that logic in a way that's easy to understand. That's why sometimes it's easiest to give that like B2C example of, hey, you're shopping for a vacuum cleaner. Let's say you're shopping for a robot vacuum.
Right.
Well, all of them could be best in different categories, but ultimately you want to figure out, so what's best for me because I have a dog and I've got kids spilling Cheerios everywhere. And I want this thing to be able to go under my furniture. And right. You have criteria. You're trying to figure out what's best for you. It's my job, if I'm selling these, to tell you what's the best in the different categories, how they perform.
No, that's brilliant. I love that, because I think anybody then can speak to, it's really giving good, trustworthy counsel. You're saying, look, if you're looking for just an example, sales training, you would say, well, are you training a very large sales team? Or is it just 2 people? Are they very experienced? Not, then you might want to look for a firm that does it this way, that highly customizes, versus somebody who doesn't do any customization because it's standard for a large team, for example. So yes, those are things I could see. You can always find a way to give good information that doesn't necessarily put you in a bad light, but helps the buyer buy.
Right? Yeah. And that's it too, because there's so many benefits in terms of search traffic. If you can cover things like this, right, you can get a lot of new people on your website reading this stuff. But one of the biggest benefits is actually using it in the sales process. I'm not sure if you've read the book Jolt Selling. Jose, have you heard of it?
I have not. No,
it's
I have
from the authors of the Challenger Sale.
Okay.
And
I've read the Challenger Sale.
Yeah. So great book, right? So
Great.
This is a newer one. And they dove into this, this problem that persists in sales, which is dealing with indecision. So you could get a prospect uncomfortable with the status quo. Mm-hmm. You could really drum up a lot of fear, uncertainty, doubt about that. They could say, yeah, I'm not happy with the situation I'm in right now and I want to change it. Yet you still deal with indecision. So why does that happen? And they narrow it down in the book to a few different things. Lack of information is one of them. Valuation problems is another. And I can't think of what the third one is off the top of my head, but those two, right? So if we're dealing with valuation problems and lack of information, by me giving you things like, here are the best, here's what might be best for you, I'm helping you get a better sense that you've looked through the proper information. You've valued all of the different options. So it's helping deal with your own inertia, let's say, right? If you just, I'm still not sure if I'm ready to make a decision. It's helping me as a salesperson deal with the problem that persists for me, which is no decision. Getting us more comfortable with spending the money.
Right. So I often talk about that, and I think about it, using a football metaphor, right? So you get stuck at the 10-yard line. Sometimes you get stuck at the 1-yard line, and you're sure you've knocked down all the necessary, you got the stakeholders aligned, you've answered all their questions, you filled out all the formulas, you gave them the spreadsheets. And for whatever reason, it went from a sure thing to it's a month later and the deal still isn't signed. What happened? I believe, if I'm hearing you correctly, Zach, it's probably one of these 5 areas that they're still a little bit like, I'm not sure about that. There's some insecurity, right? I often tell people, like, the doubtful buyer cannot buy because they're doubtful. They're afraid of losing their jobs if they make the wrong decision, or if it's personal, if they're like a privately held firm, losing money. That is, it's always personal in that case.
Yeah. You'd love that book, by the way. They really dive into that too. Errors of omission versus errors of commission. We're more afraid of making the wrong decision than making no decision. It's really, 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 really big for us in sales. We got to understand. But getting back to the big 5 too, and how it helps deal with this. If you're able to get at some point in that conversation with your prospect, you're dealing with indecision. You're able to say, okay, so you've looked through the information about cost and price, so you have a good sense as to what you should pay. You're familiar with the problems that could arise with it or other options. You've compared it to other options as well. You're familiar with what's the best for you. And and you've looked through the reviews. So what else is it? Right. And if you've done those 5 things properly, there shouldn't really be much else that you're going to do. Right. This might be a person who just can't make a decision, but look, we're dealing with the 5 things that we know so many people need in order to make that decision.
So in your experience, Zach, and I know you've worked with companies in a wide variety of industries, right? Over
Yes.
a very nice long career already. Do you think if those 5 areas are fully addressed and addressed with integrity, that these principles would apply regardless of industry?
Regardless of industry, that's the amazing thing about these 5 topics, is that it doesn't matter if it's B2B, B2C, product, service, big, small, it doesn't matter. What matters is the customer. We're obsessing over the way that they think, and these 5 things are the things that they're thinking about. Now, what we found is that this also applies not just to sales, but also to recruiting and hiring. So if you want to go out, you want to find great people to fill your organization, guess what? 5 still apply. Rather than cost and price, salary and pay. Are we talking openly and honestly
And that's like
about
the
that?
biggest, nobody wants to ever put that out there.
Oh,
I know there's laws being passed like in New York State and so on to make you put it out there. But but using this as, if I look at this from the point of view of a strategic perspective, I shouldn't need a law to tell me to do that. I should want to do that.
Well, think of all the inherent benefits of doing it. You're automatically attracting more candidates because they can actually get a good sense as to the compensation, what might take it up, what might take it down. But just like we can't expect customers to always have a solid idea of value, right? You have to teach that. It's the same thing when we're looking at hiring people. We can't assume that the job market automatically understands value as it relates to salary and pay. And so that's not to say you need to pay more. Actually, in circumstances where you actually might start people off at a lower salaries by saying, based on the experience and whatever, these are the things that would be here, but here's the trajectory to get here. And again, it's just it's addressing the elephant in the room. We all want to know these things, want to have a good sense. Why not just be transparent, open about it? And that's what earns the trust.
No, that's I'm with you on that. And there's so much more we could get into this, Zach, but I appreciate these insights. It's very, very powerful. And now I know recently you guys have launched a new podcast, I believe, right? So it's, but we're different, right?
Yeah.
So that caught my, when we talked on the pre-call before we got on the recording for this podcast, you were telling me about it. So I'd like to if you could just describe a little bit about the thought behind it, because I think it's really interesting. And I think very important for people listening to this episode to really lean in and say, I wonder if this applies to me.
Yes. Yeah. Everything we've talked about today is based on the principles of our book, They Ask, You Answer. And when we go out, we talk with folks about the things that we've already discussed here today, Jose, what they need to be talking about on their website and these changes that they need to make to perhaps their sales process or the way they're talking about themselves. They're going to think to themselves or say to themselves, yeah, Zach, but we're different. That change might apply to somebody else.
Those other guys,
yeah, but not us. We are different. Now, when you get to the heart of that, what we're actually saying, without just coming out and saying it, is, well, we're special. And you are special, right? We're all unique in our own different ways, but not different in one very important way. And that is, we're all in the business of trust. When you break it down as to why somebody would or would not do business with you, it comes back to this fundamental emotion of trust. And because we hear this though, but we're different, because we hear it so often, we thought, you know what, we're just going to own it and we're going to call the podcast, but we're different. And we're going to start helping companies address this flaw in the mindset of communication online.
Wow. I love it. I love it. And it's interesting. You're right. Everybody's special. It's like every kid is special, and so on. Right. But there are some fundamentals there, right? And there are challenges. And I would say probably, and I have to imagine, whenever you hear that, immediately that's their blind spot.
Yes.
That's probably where you want to put more attention, is the thing they call that as, don't worry about it, Zach, we got that covered. Well, I don't know. Let's check that out. Right. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Zach Basner, this has been a really interesting conversation. The time has flown, but as we come to a wrap for this session, anyone listening, I'm sure people listening would want to know more about you, your work, how to contact you. Where should they go?
Yeah, check me out on LinkedIn. I post 2 or 3 videos a week talking about some of the stuff we've talked about today. And of course, if you want to learn anything more about our coaching company, you can go to impactplus.com.
Impactplus.com. Fantastic. Zach Basner, thank you so much for being on our show today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jose. It was great.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. If you like the show, hit subscribe and leave us a review to help other people find the podcast. And if you're ready to take the next step in driving intentional growth for your business, come check out what we're doing at valueprop.com. We've developed industry-leading programs and systems to help B2B owners take control of their growth. Until then, thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose.